Block. Welcome to the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors meeting this day, September 25th, 2018. County Council, is there anything to report out of closed session?
Yes, with a motion by Supervisor Gitlin, second by Supervisor Berkowitz, the board voted to issue a letter regarding the cure and correct demand dated September 14th, 2018.
Thank you. All right, please join me for a brief moment of reflection. Thank you. Jay, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have introduction of new employees today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest HR technician, Tana Clausen. Tana comes to us with previous experience as a HR specialist supervisor for the National Park Service, and we are very excited to have her on our team.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Tana, you're certainly welcome to come and say hi to the board if you would like. Cute.
I'm introducing Cindy Vineyard. She comes to us with a lot of paralegal experience from Ohio. So she just recently moved here. She's been here for a couple days.
Oh. Welcome to the area, Cindy. Yeah, you're certainly welcome to come up and say hi also if you'd like. Great. Any other new employees to introduce today? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. The chair requests that this time any deletions, corrections, or additions from board members to the agenda. Do we have anything at this time? Nope. All right, let's go ahead and move on with our consent agenda then. Comments from members of the public may be heard at this time regarding matters on the consent agenda only. Today we have items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let's go ahead and open it up for public comment on consent agenda items only.
Move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. No public comment. Kylie, please pull the board.
Supervisor Berkowitz? Yes. Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right. I'm going to go ahead and kick off item number 11 at this time, which is the close the public hearing and waive the full reading of the proposed ordinance causing a rezone of lands currently zoned California timber, adopt the ordinance and adopt the resolution, transmit said ordinance to the California Coastal Commission for certification of the rezone as a local coastal plan or an LCP amendment as requested by Community Development Department Planner. Taylor, good morning.
Good morning. So we're bringing back this ordinance for action, which would cause a rezone of 47 acres of coastal timber zoned land in the Elk Valley area to TPZ. The property meets all of the criteria set by the Board of Supervisors for rezone to TPZ. It meets its stocking requirements, it has proper timber class, and it has a timber management plan on site. I should be clear that the government code makes it clear that the board shall adopt an ordinance to rezone into TPZ if the property meets the standards or criteria set by the board, which it does, after Planning Commission recommendation and a public hearing. I should also reiterate that this action would not change anything in regards to land use. The property owner wouldn't be afforded any additional rights or restrictions as to what he can do with the land after this action. So The recommendation would be to adopt the ordinance, adopt the resolution to transmit the ordinance to coastal, and to sign the notice of determination.
Very good. Thank you, Taylor. Questions?
Yeah, Taylor, could you enlighten me a little bit on the stocking requirements?
Yeah, those are set.
And when those were done?
Those were set, I believe, in the forest practice rules, the California forest practice rules.
1973.
Yeah,
No, I don't
70
mean that,
Forest
but I mean
Practices Act.
when the stocking requirements, well, go ahead and explain the stocking requirements.
So the stocking requirements are set in the forest practice rules and in government code. I'm not sure which government code, but in our TPZ government code. And those are certified by a registered professional forester.
But that means what? What does that mean, the stocking?
It means that the site has adequate timber, amount of volume of timber.
A volume of timber that has not been harvested, that is what? That just,
Yeah, it's the amount of timber that has the capability to be harvested on
okay.
site.
And those stocking assessments were done when?
Very recently, I believe last year,
Okay.
a registered professional forester looked at that.
Okay, so that's what I want to know. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Supervisor Gillen.
Taylor, I know we spoke about this last week. Would you just go over for the public's edification the tax consequences? I know you're not the assessor,
Yeah.
but you've addressed this in previous meetings, so the public is aware that the zoning will reflect in which way on future taxation of this 47-acre parcel.
Yeah, so speaking for the assessor, you know, the assistant assessor gave us information 2 weeks ago that we would have an estimated loss of $180,000 in assessed value, and that would come out to $1,800 a year at a 1% tax rate. So that's what was reported on 2 weeks ago.
Any other questions from the board at this time? Let's go ahead and open it up for public comment.
My name is Tom Lowry. I'm the applicant. Just a comment here, the timber tax, which is assessed at about a 3% rate, 2.9 I think, actually goes to the counties. You can't hear me? Okay. The timber tax goes to the counties. So right now you're getting a timber tax to the county and you're getting an assessed property tax to the county. And the timber tax is intended to be in lieu of the property taxes. If you look at our website, that's what it says. If you have any other questions, you can ask me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Any further questions for Taylor?
I'll make that motion, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, to, I'm hearing there's a three-way motion here, but I'll pull it in one as presented by the Community Development Department, the rezoning to TPC of this 47-acre parcel as recommended by the by Taylor, the Community Development Department. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll read this into record one more time. Adopt the ordinance and adopt the resolution to transmit said ordinance to the California Coastal Commission for certification of the rezone as the local coastal plan amendment. We have a motion on the table for the adoption of that ordinance. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Very good. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to our 10:05 timed item, which is public comment. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you're addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Public comment, please. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Hendrick, and I live in Bob's district. As you know, I'm the chair of the Democrats. I'm just speaking as an individual today because it's always my preference when we can find common ground to work on things. I enjoy watching the debate on the many issues that come up in front of this board, and I think it's helpful for the public to hear the various sides of it. The issue I want to highlight today is the governor recently signed AB 626, which is a state law that effective January 2019 will further empower cottage food industry businesses. These are small businesses where people can prepare food in their own homes to be able to sell to the public. So it sets more guidelines on a business enterprise that exists unofficially now and fairly unregulated. The state has been moving toward this direction to recognize the benefits to small communities and small businesses. The requirement for this to go into effect in this county requires that the county health department buy into this. So I would encourage you to have your staff and attorney look at the benefits of fully enabling AB 626, which would allow, regulate and enable cottage food industries in this county, which would provide economic development, which I hope is something we can all agree on. How's that?
We certainly can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment at this time? Good morning.
Good morning. Sharon McKinney, 42-year resident of District 1. I'm not going to mention the intersection at Cooper and J, but I am going to mention the intersection at Cooper and L. I see all this pretty white paint out here, and I wish there was some on that crosswalk. We have several crosswalks that are becoming obliterated, and I got news. Pedestrians are a hazard, are being hazarded by that. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, other public comment at this time? Please. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Randy Zoff. I live in Crescent City. I wanted to follow up on a proposal that I kind of threw out for permanent placement of portable potty toilets at South Beach. And I don't know what action exactly the board has decided on that, but I wanted to reiterate the need for that. We just finished a coastal cleanup last weekend, and it was pretty horrifying. Lots of human feces, lots of diapers, lots of baggies full of feces. So I'm hoping that we can move forward on that. And does the board have any further recommendations?
It's not normal for us to have an exchange
That's fine.
at the dais, but
that's perfectly fine.
if you would finish your public comment, then maybe
Okay.
we'll
That's
take a
fine.
brief moment for some exchange.
First of all, I wanted to just reach out to Lori Cohen. She was sort of chastised in an article about a week ago in the Triplicate about English ivy infestation in the county. And I wanted to go on record saying that was completely unfair characterization of her. She has nothing to do with English ivy on any private property in Delaware County. Furthermore, there are already efforts through state national parks to remove English ivy within those areas. It is been listed as a noxious weed, and the state and national parks are just about finishing a survey so that they can get into these areas and remove the English ivy. So that's that. Another item that I have is the stealing of shopping carts at Home Depot, grocery outlet, Walmart. There seems to be a reluctance in the county to enforce the theft of grocery carts. Just yesterday, I saw somebody taking a Home Depot cart, and they were over by Northcrest and Washington. So I'm imploring the board to make a recommendation to the sheriff and state police department to start enforcing that item. I mean, I think we all can feel somewhat, some pity for the homeless people that have no place else to drag their things around the county, but that does not exclude that from a misdemeanor violation. The average shopping cart costs $300 to $400. Those losses will be passed on to the consumer. At our last coastal cleanup, we found over 10 shopping carts in one site, and together, my consensus, there was over 20 shopping carts that have been stolen that are in use right now. So I'm hoping that somehow we can get a consortium together between the Sheriff's Department and the City Police Department to start enforcing that. Finally, I wanted to address the board to the Veterans Hall building, which is just right down the street. There's been an ongoing problem with a pigeon infestation there, which is causing pigeon feces to be all over the sidewalks there. I had approached Mr. Serino regarding this last year, and since that time, really nothing has been done. Their reaction is to power blast off the foyer area there, which if you go over there right now, is stick with pigeon feces. Pigeon feces contains over 250 diseases. The worst of all is histoplasmosis, which is a fungus that when transferred through the air or in common contact can lead to serious health consequences. I did also propose that we could do a permanent solution by putting bird wire or spike up above the columns. I am actually a state licensed inspector for this through the Structural Pest Control Board, so I know what I'm talking about. I also reached out to a few organizations. We could actually have the lift donated by Ace Hardware. I can have Bird Be Gone, a manufacturer in Southern California, just compass on the bird wire, so there'll literally be no effect caused to the county at all. So I'm hoping that the board can maybe revisit that at some point in time and see if we can get a permanent solution to that. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman?
Please,
Point of
Supervisor.
personal privilege. I wonder if we can have a report from our CAO on the porta potties that we ruled upon, what, a couple of meetings ago?
Sure, Supervisor. And Jay, I don't know if you want to address this during our budget discussions or now, but
I can do it now real quick. We applied for an encroachment permit through Caltrans to place them in the exact area that they were placed in previously by the Harbor District, and they explained to me that it would be probably the last week of September that we would be getting that permit back from sending it into their process, and we have not yet received it. So maybe this week.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Supervisor. All right. Obviously some food for thought from public comment today. I'm sure we'll address those individually with Jay if folks want to take some of those up. I know the grocery cart thing is front and center in everybody's mind. One thing I was reading about recently and looked into a little bit more is that they have transmitter devices on some of these carts now. It's a very inexpensive solution. Alarm bells go off when they leave the property. So it's something that we could look at and maybe work with some of our local stores to maybe implement down the road someday. But we will make that suggestion.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor.
I think this is an agenda item, and I'd like to suggest that it be addressed at our next meeting. I do have some exigent information to give and share with the audience regarding this growing problem, both cosmetically and, in fact, dangerous behavior. So I would appreciate if you put this discussion as a discussion-only item with possible recommendations to our retailers on how we can best mitigate this growing shopping cart theft problem.
Yeah, certainly would be willing to discuss that. All righty, we're going to go ahead and move on with our 10:15 timed item, which is our Cannabis Working Group update. Good morning, Jesse. How are you today?
Morning, doing okay.
Excellent.
Joel twisted my arm into giving the report today. So
I hope you didn't have to twist too hard.
No. We missed our last meeting last week, but I think we did meet once since I was here last time. We're working on commercial cultivation, indoor and outdoor. And so indoor cultivation would be cultivation within a structure that's capable of fully mitigating any nuisance effects such as odor, light, visibility, noise, etc. And this type of cultivation, the working group, we discussed the smallest tier of this, the smallest license type available by the state, which is 500 square feet. This is a relatively small operation, could be run by 1 to 4 people. So the working group's recommending this would be appropriate in ag zone properties that are 5 acres and up, and would have to achieve a 200-foot setback from residential zones that might be adjacent to these ag zone properties. And then manufacturing zones would also be appropriate with no additional setbacks. And then we talked about larger operations than that, but I think it's fair to say that the working group needs a little more time to discuss that, the prospect of larger indoor operations. Outdoor cultivation, that would be just cultivation out in the open or in greenhouse structures that can't mitigate nuisance effects. So we talked about, again, the smallest tier available from the state, which is 2,500 square feet. A relatively small operation. It can be run, again, by 1 to 4 people. It seems appropriate in ag zone properties, 20 acres and up. So in the beginning, there was an idea that maybe ag zone properties would be off the table, but the working group has pretty good consensus that this is an agricultural type of operation, and there are properties that are suitable for it. So when we're talking about 1,000-foot setback from residential zones, and a 200-foot setback from other ag parcels that might be adjacent, and from public roads, public spaces like public roads.
And this is enclosed?
No, this is outdoor cultivation that could either be out in the open or in a greenhouse that may be open at some time. A greenhouse that wouldn't be capable of mitigating things like odor and visibility. So more or less out in the open. And so
in ag zone?
Yes, in ag zone properties. And so the reason being that there are spaces that are far enough away from residential zones and far enough away from places where they might cause nuisance issues. And then we had discussion about visibility standards and how to achieve that. And I don't have a lot of details here for you regarding how that would work. That's legal definitions and such. But with an operation that small, the working group does have good consensus that with large setbacks, that could be a definite appropriate use for ag parcels. And then we talked about timberlands in the 10 to 20 acre range. Same thing, 1,000-foot setback from residential zones. And then for both ag and timberlands, strict environmental standards becomes more of an issue in timberlands. Again, don't have a lot of details. We're following state rules, water board rules, Department of Fish and Wildlife rules. And then in timberlands, the roads would be the limiting factor for the most part. So that's again why sticking to the smallest tier, 2,500 square feet, relatively from a commercial standpoint, a very small operation, low impact. And then we talked a little bit about caps and how to achieve that. Not really sure effectively how to do it other than to just have a cap, pick a number, and stick to it. We talked about numbers sort of in the 10 to 100 range, is sort of the range we're kicking around. But we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, what it would look like. If we would have separate caps for indoor and outdoor, separate caps depending on scale, which would probably be appropriate. If we went to a larger scale, then caps of lower numbers might be appropriate. But most likely, it would take some time to even bump up against caps of this number. We're probably not going to get a huge rush of viable, well-funded applicants right at the beginning anyway. So.
Okay.
That's about it. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Questions for Jesse at this time? Supervisor Berkowitz?
Mr. Chairman, I just had an inquiry here. I thought that the board had gave direction that they did not want any outdoor grow. I thought Supervisor Cowan made that recommendation.
I don't recall that at all. I think and that's why I was questioning Jesse, it was specific to the ag zoning. I've been fairly clear I was not comfortable with any commercial cultivation within the ag zoning. So far, I wanted to move forward with experimental and TPZ. I think at the last board meeting, that was the discussion that I recall, I believe Supervisor Cowan making mention during that working group presentation. I think the working group is coming up with obviously some ideas of their own, which is what their intent is, and they see with various levels of defining what that might look like on the ground and being involved with it every day, that it sounds like they might be looking to recommend to us something different than what the board gave an opinion on. But that's just how I recall the conversation, and I'm not sure if that's correct or not.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Cowan, please. I'll give it to you in a second, Supervisor.
Yeah, I've always kind of said I don't want to see it outdoors. That's just been my opinion. I don't know that it was a recommendation or consensus at the meeting, but my opinion has always been to keep it indoor, no big fences, no making sure everything's locked and secure, however we get to that point. So you're correct, Supervisor Berkowitz, in saying that, yeah, my opinion is that, that's what I would like to see, but I'm only one of 5 and a whole community that needs to have the input, but yeah.
And of course, I agree with your opinion.
Yep. Supervisor Gitlin.
Jesse, I didn't hear any acknowledgement that our Planning Commission has turned down on a 3-2 vote, I might add, any outdoor growth in Del Norte County. You didn't address that in your report. Are you acknowledging that the Planning Commission has checked in on the issue of outdoor cultivation of the marijuana product?
Yeah, I'll work backwards here through the questions. Supervisor Gitlin, yeah, as far as I understand, the Planning Commission had before them a manufacturing and retail ordinance that didn't include any element of cultivation. So they weren't commenting or inputting or voting on cultivation whatsoever. And then this is just a report on our last meeting, and so we didn't talk about the Planning Commission much or the retail ordinance.
So my question is, did you meet after the Planning Commission had its decision? Did you meet as a group?
Yes.
And you did not discuss this?
We did, but not in the context of cultivation, because the Planning Commission, what they had before them, didn't include cultivation.
So what was the context of your conversation on the discussion? What is it you discussed that the Planning Commission decided on? Was that part of your conversation?
No, not really. I mean, we discussed that it happened, and Joel talked about it, but it's sort of out of our hands. It has been for many months. The retail manufacturing ordinance working group made its recommendations, and County Council drafted an ordinance, and then it will come to the board. So it wasn't. It was already past where the working group had a chance to make changes or give input.
Well, I'm a little confused as to how you presented this. The planning decision made a clear decision on something. You really didn't discuss it. I'm not sure you even acknowledged it, or maybe even ignored it, and just went on to create ordinance, which we're going to vote on shortly, without acknowledgement of the Del Norte County Planning Commission. Is that what happened?
Well, I'm having a little trouble following you, but if I understand what you're saying, the Planning Commission voted. They didn't really give much input. And so I guess the working group isn't clear on where the working group is involved in that process. It's, it kind of starts with the working group in the form of discussions. County Council drafts an ordinance. It goes to the Planning Commission and then to the board. So that's sort of the order of operations as I understand it, but Council may have a better, clear way of explaining it.
I think he's confused on what went to the Planning Commission was retail, which was out of your hands months ago. Sure. What you guys are working on now is cultivation. Sure. And I think that's where Mr. Gitlin's getting confused.
No. Sure. We could back up and say...
Actually, I'm not confused. I just want clarity from what your board, what your group decided on after the Planning Commission met last month. That's simple. That's not confusing. Thank you for speaking for me, Supervisor Cowan. I can do my own speaking. I'm not confused. I want to know if you addressed the Planning Commission's decision to not have outdoor growth or any growth of the marijuana product in Del Norte County.
That's not what they were asked to address.
Well, did you discuss that?
I'd say
is it yes or no?
I'd say the answer would be no. We did not discuss it in the context that you're referring to. No. But you could watch the meeting. It's on YouTube, so you could see exactly what was said verbatim.
And to be clear, Jesse, the Planning Commission, as you've stated, was only asked to address, for recommendation of the board, the manufacturing and retail component of the ordinance that is before us today. They weren't asked to discuss specifically cultivation, which was what the working group is working on right now.
If they had returned it with some specific recommendations for modification, alternative options, things like that, then the working group may have had something to work with. But short of input, it's out of the working group's hands. And then Supervisor Cowan, the idea of visibility outside is definitely, that's the major consideration in the discussions. And that's why the large numbers, the large setbacks, the zoning, the large parcels. There aren't very many large parcels like that. So that naturally limits numbers. And it allows, those kinds of distances allow for, mitigation with visibility. And again, the working group feels that ag zone properties are appropriate for these kinds of agricultural operations. It seems that operation this small would probably create far less nuisance than many of the operations that are principally permitted in ag zones. So these would not be principally permitted. They would be go through the use permit process and most likely come back to the board for approval, whereas there's other far more intense operations that have far more capability to produce nuisance that are principally permitted where the board would not even be able to weigh in. Okay. And then Supervisor Berkowitz, again, I do recall the two of you talking about not being comfortable with cultivation outdoors. And yeah, it's just sort of the purpose of the work group is to break the discussion down as far as possible with as much information as possible and spend hours and hours talking about it to find out where the real problems lie and if there are solutions, and if there are, then we work best to find those solutions. Yeah, so that's kind of what concern.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, Jesse. I think there was more or less consensus on not having outdoor grows, and while I didn't out and out say that I was against it, I did say I had some concerns. So those concerns have not been alleviated. So I think there is an issue with outside grows, and that's going to be a non-starter, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I went and visited one that's currently producing at large scale yesterday with Assemblyman Adam Gray on tribal land, and it was clear that it's absolutely in the coastal zone. It's on property that used to be zoned ag. It's at a scale that this board or body would likely never consider to start off with. They're wrestling with troubles daily because of the coastal influence and mold and moisture issues and having to evaporate or dehumidify their operation constantly. Anybody in that zone is probably going to have to deal with that to some extent.
Sure.
But I'm not a grower. I don't cultivate the stuff.
Sure.
But I do, after having visited something of scale in that footprint, and I believe they had 5 houses that were in the 3,000 square foot range apiece, with an estimated production they hope to yield out of 4 crops per year around 2,000 pounds. They, they're going through a lot of growing pains. But what I did like and what I did want to mention is the visible nature of this operation wasn't there. It was fairly well concealed. And I think I've been fairly clear at the start, I do not want to see something like a Cave Junction situation where we have nuisance odor and fenced walls or whatever scattered throughout because of this. We're a tourist community.
Sure.
I think that's where the root of our community's at, in the heart of the redwoods. But detracting from that in any way has been where I get hesitant. I want to approach this with caution and on an experimental basis, and that's why I was very comfortable with going in an ad approach with TPZ land. But if we have to consider something that's going to be an ag, I'd rather see that entirely in an enclosed operation, and that's just my opinion so far.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it was just we had the time to discuss the range of things, so we took advantage of that. To make sure we discuss the zonings, and if it was going to be a thing, what would the parameters look like? Not to judge or suggest what the board is comfortable with. But I do want to reiterate that outdoor cultivation in general, wherever it lands, if ever, it's very important. Indoor cultivation is, and I'm drifting a little bit into my opinion, but just to be clear, but indoor cultivation isn't fully sustainable long term. It's an environmental disaster in terms of electrical consumption. That's my opinion. So, I'm reluctant to recommend indoor cultivation. I don't like it. I don't want to see it. But it's good business opportunity, and there's other members of the working group who think it's very important to include. It's simpler to figure out in the beginning. That's why we started with that, because it's easier to deal with nuisance mitigation. But outdoor cultivation makes more sense. It's more economical. It's much less hard on the environment. It's where the plant belongs. And so the group wants to continue to work hard to find out where that is. So.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right,
I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment at this time. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Chuck Orton. I thought I'd have pictures for you today. I don't know if you said you've been in a grow. Well, I went over to a lot of friends of mine, which is nice. So let me take a camera in and take pictures from outside, like you said. 6 plants, probably about the size of the inside of your seal there. Greenhouse from here to whatever, with this certain type of seeds, you know, grown like this. Other ones grows big as the whole thing there, big as Volkswagens. And you know, this county used to be able, you could grow 99 plants here. You could go right out there where the people get their food stamps and things, the county office, and you pick up your paperwork. You can grow 99 plants here, and there wasn't a big problem with it. You know, with people, no guns, no this and that. Naturally, they'd arrested 1 or 2 people, probably 20 years ago. I've been to court, you know, special witness for that and things like that. And so we can talk all the time we want about here, but when you actually see some of this, and ma'am, you don't like wooden fences. Well, the shop over there in North Crest and Morrison, I've been going in there for 60 years, and my brother-in-law owned it before that. Should I take my wooden fence down? I can't keep the homeless people out there right now from defecating inside the shop and stealing things. What do you're against wood? I used to have a portable sawmill. I mean, you know, it's silly. And sir, would you please quit arguing in here over this cannabis thing? Or you're going to have to do, like I said before, you're going to have to put that hookah up here, and you're all going to have to get your medical cards. And whoever argues is going to have to take a hit off of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Public comment. Okay. Robert, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Robert. Just want to say, you know, as far as the outdoor, you know, I think it is kind of not real business viable in the coastal zone. It's really something I think we considered well, you know, as a land rights issue, you know, would it be a nuisance and that kind of thing. So we took it from that perspective. But I think most of us felt that, you know, outdoor cultivation in that area probably wouldn't be sustainable with state standards. But I always like to throw the economical end back out there. And there's one product that, you know, we've always carried at Patients Together, Loud Packs products, and they make cartridges. And they used to make dabbables, little cannabis oils. And now they're getting into just growing greenhouse. But now Loud Pack's now the largest employer in Greenfield, California. You know, and so, and they did that despite a huge tax per square foot. There was actually a cap on the fees, so they just said, hey, well, let's go big. And so I'd like to, you know, while we're always thinking, you know, hey, small and restrained, you know, always think about, you know, any kind of economic opportunity we can have for a wage earner. Thank you.
So thank you.
Jesse Davis. One thing I just forgot to mention, and the idea of utilizing coastal lands, not necessarily coastal commission lands, but coastal ag land, economically and from the business standpoint, would be for nurseries, not for flower production. And so nursery production is much less, it doesn't produce lots of odors, and you know, you don't have processing facilities and things like that necessarily have to be on site. And so nursery operations are ideally suited to coastal lands because you're not dealing with heat. It can be done in greenhouses. And so there's, you know, more discussion to be had about the level of the structure that would be required that could satisfy and mitigate concerns. And so I just want to remind everybody that nurseries could be a viable business for exporting product anywhere throughout the state. It could employ people here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Other comments from the board at this time? Yeah, you know, just oh, sorry. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Good morning, board. My name's Eric Inther, member of the advisory committee. Everybody's talking about cultivation. I'm just going to make a quick comment about the retail manufacturing ordinance that's going to be in front of you today. Appreciate you guys, looking at it, and appreciate all Joel's time and the rest of the county staff time. It's been a lot of work. We've put a lot of effort from a community standpoint. We have a lot of different opinions that have come into this. In terms of the cultivation, like Jesse had said, we had started the process out about speaking about outdoor cultivation in the ag zones. Personally, I'm probably one of the few people who didn't really want to get into talking about cultivation in the ag zones. Just specific to my own opinion, ag zones aren't conducive to outdoor cultivation. They could be conducive for nursery production. The indoor cultivation was where we had started with the ag. It started to just kind of take its own little turns and twists within the discussions of the groups over a few meetings. So, we did put some effort into considering what the outdoor cultivation could look like in the ag zone. Obviously, it's up to you guys to make that decision. If you don't want to see visibility of cannabis in the ag zones, that's totally up to you guys. It's your decision. I don't think, as a group, or a member of this group, that we really have any personal opinions as it. We wanted to draft up something that took all the considerations of the community. As many people who would show up to this meeting we listened to. Any one of you, any one of the public can look at these meetings. It's completely transparent. So I just want to lend my support once again to this group, and I do hope at some point when we finally get this out and rolling that the board considers keeping this board together, or keeping some semblance of an advisory community advisory board together. I think it could be a very good mechanism for dealing with nuisance troubles, community issues. It's a good working platform for the community to voice concerns. That's not in the board chambers. So again, I thank you guys very much, and good luck with the introduction.
Thank you for your time, Eric. Other public comment? Okay, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. Other comments from the board members at this time? Supervisor Cowan.
I don't want you to think that I don't want to see wooden fences. That was maybe misspoke. I think when I say fences, I think of black tarps and what we see down 199, not so much wooden fences. For me with ag, I guess I was going with Coastal Commission, and what was set there with, to me, was the ag area, and their standards, I believe, have to be inside a greenhouse or building, was my understanding. So I guess I was never picturing, maybe like Chair Howard was, big outdoor grows in those areas because it was Coastal Commission areas. I guess I'm with you. If it, I want to see it indoor. So if it's going to be indoor in those areas, that's wasn't such a big issue to me. But now I'm hearing, am I hearing correctly, Jesse, that we could have outdoor grows in an ag area in the coastal area, just not the Coastal Commission area?
Yeah, I think you can have whatever you want. But that was one of the recommendations of the working group, that there is a scale, a small enough scale that could be appropriate on certain ag lands, provided that they're not visible and they're not anywhere near residential zones. So those were the strict qualifications. Thank you.
Well, Jesse, I'm sure we'll have this debate again soon, but appreciate all your time and comments on this effort and keeping folks together.
Appreciate y'all.
All right, and just a brief comment. I want to reflect on Robert's comments about the economic job piece of this. It's something that I normally didn't consider as part of the industry here, but just the visitation to the location yesterday, 8 full-time employees year-round, well above minimum wage. So yeah, there's a jobs benefit to this. Clearly, I don't know what a smaller scale operation would look like, but just from a commercial scale like that they were doing, I was surprised that they would keep 8 people employed full-time all year round, well above minimum wage. So that's good to know. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is item number 12. Introduce the following cannabis ordinance by title only, waive full reading, and set a hearing to adopt the ordinance. A, an ordinance establishing regulations for commercial cannabis retail and manufacturing activity outside the coastal zone. B, an ordinance establishing regulation for commercial cannabis retail and manufacturing activity within the coastal zone. And C, an ordinance amending the prohibition of commercial cannabis activity and designate County Council to prepare a summary of the ordinances for publication as requested by County Council. Joel, good to see you again.
You too. Good morning, everybody. I think I should start with some clarifying comments about the what Supervisor Gitlin just brought up with the working group's response to the Planning Commission. When a zoning ordinance goes to the Planning Commission recommends yes or no to the board. It doesn't kick it back to the applicant. So the working group did not have an opportunity to adjust or make a decision. What we talked about in the working group was kind of a recap of what happened. It is the natural flow of the process that the ordinance is now here with a no recommendation from the Planning Commission. So it's not so much that the working group decided not to do anything, it's that the working group was not presented with the issue.
Joel, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes, sir.
I've been remiss, and there's employees in the audience, and I forgot the reading of the proclamation that was on our agenda.
Okay.
I'm going to have you pause. I'm going to have Supervisor Hemmingson briefly read this out so we could get folks back to the office today. I'll be back in just a second.
Yeah, I don't think I can briefly read it out, but
that's
pretty
okay.
long.
You'll do your best.
I'll stumble through it the best I can. This is a proclamation honoring Binational Health Week. This measure would call on all the people of Del Norte County to join the people of Latino origin in observing and participating in the 18th Annual Binational Health Week to take place on October 1st through the 31st, 2018. Whereas the Secretariats of Health and Foreign Affairs of Mexico, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, the Mexican Social Security Institute, the United States-Mexico Border Health Commission, and the Health Initiative of the Americas, a program of the University of California at Berkeley, School of Public Health, have recognized the necessity of improving access to health services for the underserved Latino population in the United States of America. And whereas, according to the 2014 United States Census, this county is home to more than 55 million people of Latino. This country is home to more, I hope I didn't say county, because that would be a lot, is home to more than 55 million people of Latino origin. And whereas improving the health of mobile populations requires multiple approaches in service design, delivery, funding priorities, and most fundamentally requires strong binational commitment. And whereas in October 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017, the Health Initiative of the Americas and partnering organizations convened for the first 9 binational health weeks, an unprecedented effort overseen by multi-agency task force which conducted health promotion and education activities for the underserved Latino population in the United States, and over 1 million people benefited from the healthcare activities. And whereas Binational Health Week reflects coordinated efforts between the United States, Mexico, Canada, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru to improve the quality of life of underserved populations by expanding their access to health care, increasing their health insurance coverage, and reducing their unmet health needs. And whereas the Health Initiative of Americas and the Consular Network in the United States of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru are coordinating the 9th Annual Binational Health Week, and activities throughout the country will be centered in the regions with a high level of community health needs. And whereas Del Norte County acknowledges the many organizations and volunteers collaborating in the organization of health fairs and educational health workshops, And whereas Binational Health Week provides an opportunity to highlight critical health issues in Del Norte County and throughout the United States, and will serve as the basis for future bilateral efforts. And whereas Del Norte County is committed to recognizing and honoring those observances that are dedicated to the best ideals of public service and Binational Health Week in one such worthy observance. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors that in honor of those efforts to improve public health, October 1st through the 31st, 2018 be declared the 18th annual Binational Health Week throughout Del Norte County, passed and adopted this 25th day of September 2018.
Please.
Thank you so much for honoring us with this. It's a community effort, and it is called the Binational Health Week, but I like to call it the International Health Week because we have so many citizens in our county that are not only Latino, but we have Hmong, we have the Native Americans, and just everybody in general. And so, and all of the underserved, we work as a community. It's a community effort with the different organizations to do this, and we put it together every year. So come and get your flu shot on October 7th.
Thank you, Hilda. Joel, thank you for allowing me to divert just a little there. You're back on track.
Thank you. So I guess as an introductory thought, this is kind of two parts. One is a zoning ordinance that creates an area that retail and manufacturing be allowed, and the other is a use permit process that is not specific to retail and manufacturing, but is intended, it's hoped that it will seamlessly work for all other aspects of the cannabis industry as the board decides to allow them. And so if you have questions while we're going through this about how that might relate to cultivation, you know, those are questions that we can start kind of anticipating. This is very similar to what I spoke about last time when I gave you kind of the rough outline. Now that you have the actual language in front of you, maybe there's more questions, but the only actual difference is that we moved that 500-foot setback to 1,000 for the medical, as the board indicated it wanted. So it starts with this combining district concept where you have all the zones in an area, they have rules and regulations and allow uses, and then on top of them is an overlay zone that will allow cannabis manufacturing and cultivation, so long as the underlying zone permits those, you know, kind of rough commercial activities. So, you know, cannabis manufacturing will be allowed in zones that allow manufacturing like C4 and M, but not in zones that wouldn't, like C2. I think this part is where things get confusing and people kind of wonder where is it actually going to happen, and I'm hoping to make that clear. This red line is the Crescent City urban boundary, and the combining zone will be coextensive with this line. It will not include the yellow part, that's the city, where we don't have jurisdiction. And the red is your commercial zones, and your purple is your manufacturing zones. So it's not going to happen anywhere else. Most of what else you see there would be residential. This is a pretty small slice of the county where this is going to be available to apply. And I hope that people can kind of visualize where the potential spots are. You can see it along North Crest, the 101, and out kind of along Elk Valley there.
Joel, can I pause you briefly? So, for instance, the purple area indicated by manufacturing, that would be off of Elk Valley Road. Because it's not in the red area, is it not included in the ordinance?
Right. It's started with a map that just showed the commercial and manufacturing, and so there's some spots that are outside, and that would be one of them. It's
Thank you.
only in the red. Here is another map. It's the same area, but now this only shows the C4 and the M. So whereas the other one would be kind of all the areas covered by the combined district, this is the ones that, these are the ones where manufacturing specifically might be permitted. You know, you can kind of see that a lot of that North Crest territory was removed. So I can come back to these maps anytime you want as kind of questions arise.
And just back up real quick, just so I'm clear, the purple area at the top of North Crest, that's the standard veneer.
Yeah, that's
area.
Yeah, I think this is Standard Veneer Road right here is basically the red line.
Okay, thank you.
So a use permit is a flexibility device in zoning where the uses are specified in the law, but they're not allowed to actually be done until you get this permit. It is an extremely important device because it allows the public to engage in this negotiation with a property owner, set conditions, and it's kind of, when zoning is often called a public property right, where you have somebody that wants to do something and you have community concerns. Sometimes the community will let them do it, but there's going to be a cost or some negotiation. The use permit is really the vehicle through which both sides come together. The proposed user gives up some things, the public gives up some things, and the idea is that we meet in the middle with something everybody's happy with. So most of our county use permits have no hard specific conditions. They're added as recommended by staff. This one will have a combination of those. It'll have hard conditions and then staff will add more. And these are some of the kind of key standing conditions. One is a 1-year renewal. That's not typical for a use permit. Another one is to have a state license. You have to comply with all state laws, so we can enforce those state laws as a condition of your use permit. Pay all your taxes, assuming the tax ordinance passes, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that later?
We're going to talk about it at the end, but if you want to go ahead and...
Well, I mean, if you're going to explain, I hate to ask a question that you're going to explain, and then I look like I'm foolish here. I just want to know, is this ordinance conditional on the tax ordinance passing?
It is not. And so when we get to the end, I have some kind of options for the board to go, and we can talk about what the board wants to do with that particular thing. Supervisor
Joel.
Gillen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Supervisor Gillen for just a minute.
Joel, I'm looking at this video here, use permit. Timely remit all taxes, assuming tax ordinance passes. Are these transactions in cash?
If they pay their taxes in cash?
Or can you write a check out? I mean, I'm a little confused about the Financial Transaction Act, which was put on hold or not going to be voted on by the Assembly or with the Senate. Now, are all transactions, including transactions with the county, when you pay your fees, do they have to be transacted in cash, or can someone come in with a draft that goes through our banking system?
Well, so the county tax collector can take cash or a check. The question would be whether the cannabis business can bank its business in a way that allows it to draft a check. And that is a situation that I don't think is our problem and not one that we address. The state is working on solutions. There are, kind of online banking, entrepreneurial models that people are working with. There's credit unions that currently, some few that will do it.
All right, so I see Mr. Dorigo in the audience. He has a business. He's going to come in and he's going to remit his taxes, and he's going to pay it in a check that says Robert Dorigo on it, and that can be transacted accordingly. There's no prohibition against that currently with our federal banking laws.
Well, there's no prohibition on the county accepting money from people who owe taxes. It is not the county's function to decide who has and who hasn't complied with what federal laws. We impose a tax and people pay it, and they can pay it through a check or cash. If they can't get a check because they can't bank it, because it's FDIC insured and they won't accept a cannabis business, that would be between the operator and that financial institution. And there are things in the works that the state is trying to do to make that easier for people, but I don't consider that the county's burden to solve for them.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
Yes, Joel, I'm really concerned with the one-year permit. I know it says with renewal, but that's not guaranteed. And I've operated a lot of businesses here, and if I had a business where I only had a one-year permit, I'd be concerned with the longevity of that business. I don't think I could go along with a one-year renewal. Might be 2 years, but not a 1 year, because you've got no guarantee that your business is going to be operating for more than 1 year.
So the state permits are 1 year, so they're going to have to deal with the uncertainty to begin with. But to help kind of hedge that concern, the renewal does not mean you have to go through the whole process again. The Planning Commission is still going to have to make those same findings, that you're not causing a nuisance, that you don't have any outstanding county fees. You're going to have to be in compliance with laws. The only kind of, well, the primary relaxed standard for a renewal is the setback from a school. So if a school comes and moves right next to you, you don't have to leave. But otherwise, we do want to be reviewing these year after year. It's not an automatic renewal or a vested right. Now that is going to be fairly uncertain for a property owner. The working group felt it was a reasonable request, and if you would like to create extended protections for a cannabis business, we can certainly make that happen.
I would think that would be very important to any business.
Well, I kind of see this as being a test balloon. If we get a year from now and nobody's applied because it's too uncertain and there's no guarantee and there's no vested rights, then we'll know that we made this too restrictive. Or depending on the board's values, we made it exactly restrictive enough to protect ourselves. Those are all kind of policy decisions.
Yeah, not to sidetrack, because I know you've got your process, but I do want to address Supervisor Berkowitz's point real quick, and that's how I was viewing it too, Supervisor, with the idea that the board can always come back and revisit this if it becomes too burdensome on the business. But I think in the interim, as we're getting ready to potentially consider this ordinance, having those precautions in place might be prudent for us to consider. And at such time as we get reputable businesses that seem to be complying with with what we've put in place under that use permit, then maybe at that time the board would reconsider something a little more long-term that would add some structure in a 2 or 3 year type process instead of every year.
Just seems to be too iffy for me. But then again, that's just me.
Yeah, and I think as long as the state's going to require a 1 year renewal, there would be no reason that we shouldn't. I would hate to go below or above, whichever way direction you want to say, above the state standards in this particular case.
Yeah. But point's well taken. Thank you, Joel.
The attitude of the working group has been to recognize that a substantial part of the community has strong feelings and is against cannabis, even members of the working group. And so even the very strongly pro-cannabis voices on the working group have understood that there's some proving to be done by the commercial community before these things are going to be opened. And so, the people on the working group felt like this was a reasonable compromise. We'll see if it, ends up having been that way. But staff also would like to keep it fairly restrictive until, nobody wants to get burned on this, I think is a big concern. That's kind of risk aversion that is ultimately your call, where you want to kind of peg that a balance. This is just a recommendation staff and the working group kind of came together on. So, the permit application is going to require some things that I think are going to be very helpful. You have to disclose any owner in that business, the proposed business, has any other permits anywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a permit in every county and you're a big conglomeration of cannabis growers that you can't get one. But it does mean that the community can come and look and decide if you're the type of business the community wants. And a lot of these features of this ordinance are not these hard rules that say you can't do it if you own other things. It's to get the information in front of the public so the public can engage in that decision about, is this the kind of thing we want to cite in our neighborhood? There's a bond that will require a $15,000 bond. So if something goes sideways, if they leave in the night, if they can't function, they leave us a nuisance site, we'll have some protection. $15,000 should be enough to remediate, for the most part, a commercial operation. When we get to cultivation, that will probably need to be higher.
Joel, how did you arrive at the $15,000 figure for the surety bond?
The state was requiring a $5,000 bond, and I tripled it arbitrarily. So if you want to make it higher, you can. There's really nothing that was based on. It seemed like if we're going to have a code enforcement action on a commercial operation, that seems like a reasonable amount to ask for without burdening the applicant too much. It shouldn't be that expensive to get a $15,000 bond. Indemnification is a fun one. That means that if the planning commission turns them down and they want to appeal it to the board, and if the board turns them down, they want to take it to court, if they lose, they're going to have to pay our attorney's fees and our staff time and our filing fees and whatever we end up with. So they still have all of their rights to move forward, but it's not free. They can't just harass us with frivolous things. They're going to have to make an investment or calculate the cost of paying for our attorney time if we have to fight this thing in Superior Court. Then evidence of title to land or permission. We don't want tenants without permission doing this. A use permit runs with the land, and so the property owner needs to be the one that's ultimately responsible for the nuisance, and so that they should have evidence in the record that they're okay with it. The application fee has come up a lot. A fee can't be more than is reasonably necessary to cover our costs, or it becomes a presumptive tax which needs voter approval. It's hard to predict what this is going to cost. I think that we're running with the assumption that for now it's going to cost like a normal use permit, because most of these things, CEQA review has its its own fee. We're kind of adding the conditions that are fairly standard a lot of the times. Major use permit, I think, is $1,700. We can then fee study that as it happens. So if we do 3 of these and we find out that's not nearly enough to cover our costs, what we do is then take the data, bring it to the board, publish it 10 days before a hearing, and the board can set a new higher fee for cannabis. But until we have that data, it's kind of hard to bring that to a public hearing on the fee.
Sorry, Supervisor Cowan.
I guess for me, I always pictured permit fees being a little higher than normal. And I really think so now, because we don't know where that tax is going to go. If we don't have the tax, if Measure B does not pass, that is the money that we're expecting to help with code enforcement and safety issues. And I think if we don't get that tax, then the only thing that we have to help with the other side of it that maybe so code enforcement and public safety may not be normally a fee that you would equate into that $1,700. In my head, I'm equating it there because I am unsure of Measure B. I would think that people would understand that, but unfortunately there's a lot of people out there, or misinformation on that being said, that if it doesn't pass, we're kind of left. And so I look at the permit fee being in place to make sure that we have the funds needed for those things.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback on Supervisor Cowan's comments there, I'm in complete agreement with her on this particular issue. We had folks from Calusa here, their ag commissioner made the presentation. They did an analysis. They went through that process. They were a medical use at the time, but they knew the departments that use ordinance or permit would cover, and it was impacting public health, it was impacting law enforcement, it was impacting code enforcement, CDD, various departments, including environmental health. That fee, I believe, whether we think so or not, just looking at what other counties are doing and how that fee structure is currently set up, I don't think that the associated costs with this are going to be traditional with our current use permit structure. I just don't. And Supervisor Cowan, whether you want to call it hedging our bets or not, I'm in full agreement. If that measure were to move forward and not pass, we could be potentially left holding the bag. Not for long. Obviously, the board could take immediate action to help reflect those costs, but I do want the board to consider that. Supervisor Berkowitz, I didn't know if you had a comment, but okay, very good.
Well, there's nothing in the ordinance one way or the other, right? So there's not like it says in here it's the standard permit fee. It would be kind of an adoption by the board as like the normal fee schedule. So it can be considered simultaneously. I don't, that'd be a question probably for Heidi, how they would estimate those costs and what it would cost more. And we can get into that. You know, when it comes to enforcement, though, it gets tricky to include that in a permit fee because enforcement costs are recoverable. You know, you can't include it in the permit fee and then lien their property for your costs. You're double dipping and you're creating, again, a tax. So you know, with counties that allowed large grows and a pretty significant commercial presence, they did have a lot of costs. This one, you know, especially because we're not at cultivation yet, and cultivation would be probably another conversation about it. It wasn't really the opinion of planning that this would be much different than a typical use permit. And, you know, maybe the typical use permit is under charge at the moment. I don't know. We can revisit all of these things. So we'll take the board's considerations and run with them. So the key component of the application is an operation plan where you're going to have to submit one to the state anyway. So we're just requiring basically the same stuff. Tell us where you're going to do it, what the building going to look like, what's the square footage, give us a diagram. Where are you going to get your water from? How are you going to conserve? Where are you going to put your waste, your wastewater, your discharge? Where are you going to get electricity? As Jesse said, there is a lot of concern about electricity usage for indoor grows. And the state has some requirements for renewable energy and carbon credits and things. We don't have anything specific we're requiring, just that you tell us about it. Then staff can make a determination case by case if a condition needs to be inserted to protect resources. The same goes to odor prevention devices. We don't have in this ordinance a hard, you shall not make a smell rule. But we do have, you shall tell us what you're going to do about smell and we're going to evaluate it. There might be sites where some smell is okay. There might be sites where no smell is okay. And that kind of is that community negotiation where in order to get the jobs or in order to get the taxable revenue, the community might tolerate some amount of smell. So it's not that hard rule. And we'll bring that back up again later. Security, hours of operation. This, the retail is limited to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We'll get into that. The other ones aren't limited, but the Planning Commission can if they want to see no manufacturing at 2 a.m. You know, because that particular area can't handle that kind of activity. We can do that. And along with all of this will be, you know, track and trace procedures, your kind of employee manuals, how are you going to do quality control? Your whole business plan basically is coming before the Planning Commission. And then when we approve it, you're stuck with it. And if you then radically deviate from what you told the county you're going to do, you're in violation of your use permit. All permits are going to need some basic findings from the Planning Commission. I like the idea of having Planning Commission findings because instead of hard rules, we have a kind of appealable finding of fact. And so evidence will have to be on the record People can come, they can say their piece, they can present whatever evidence they want. It gives an appealable issue to the Board of Supervisors. So it has this kind of theme of a negotiation built into it. If the Planning Commission looks at this business plan and says, yes, it can comply with state and local laws, they can make that finding. No unavoidable impacts on the environment. That's just kind of reiterating that it's gone through secret review. The operation plan will mitigate nuisances, and this is kind of the finding that should offer that primary protection. We've looked at your plan, what you're going to do, it's not going to be a nuisance to your neighborhood. Then if you stick to your plan, we shouldn't have enforcement issues. And if you don't stick to your plan, our enforcement issues are, you didn't stick to your plan. We don't have complex issues of proof. We have, look, you said you were going to use this odor prevention device and you didn't. So these kind of clear certainty things mixed with the kind of finding discretion helps, I think, everybody get to where they need to go. Then this is the ultimate finding that I think is going to give the community the opportunity to come and talk neighborhood specific about what is important to them in that area. And that is that the proposed activity will have no likely or reasonably foreseeable negative effect on any sensitive land use in the surrounding area, regardless of the distance. It's not just that 1,000-foot setback. It could be 5,000 feet or 5 miles away. For the purposes of this section, sensitive uses include, but are not limited to, churches, parks, public buildings, healthcare facilities. The public can show up and say, this thing over here is a sensitive use. It's not defined, it's not limited here. The Planning Commission, the public, the process, the community can come and argue and decide what's sensitive to us and what are the impacts that we are dealing with or mitigating. Specific to retail, 1,000 feet from a school or daycare for adult use. I should have changed that adult use and just deleted it. We made it the same for medical too, per the board's request. It's 1,000 feet for any other retailer to control density. There'll have to be proper packaging, security, loitering prevention, cameras. These are all actually state regulations, but to make them clear and easy to apply, we've repeated them. Just for manufacturing, we have the C4 and M zones. That was that second map. A lot of the harder, more labor-intensive regulating happens with volatile solvents where you could accidentally blow yourself up. Carbon dioxide and ethanol are considered non-volatile, even though you technically can still probably blow yourself up or start a fire. So there's an extra finding that that's not going to be a problem. There's going to be some extra consideration of that in the plan, but no other volatile solvents can be used. It's going to be kind of a low-intensity manufacturing use. And these will be 1,000 feet from the schools and daycares, but not from each other. So you can lump those manufacturing zones together, which is usually what we do with manufacturing. Then on top of all this, we have currently a ban. So we have to fix that if anybody's going to allow to get one of these use permits. So the ban doesn't change in any way. You still can't do it, except pursuant to a use permit. So this won't have to be changed again. We're not come back for cultivation. You now can do it with a use permit, and then as the board allows more different types of use permits. And we haven't even talked about distribution. We haven't talked about testing. We haven't talked about the other elements of the industry. We've been just retail manufacturing and cultivation. So once we revise this, then we'll control the use with the use permit process and which uses are permitted in which zones rather than with changing this ban. The ban should stick around in that form. What's not in this ordinance, there's no cap on permits. It is that kind of natural cap idea that we've controlled the limited area with the 1,000-foot setback between them, and schools will naturally limit the amount, so we don't have to get into issues of who's choosing which people will get the things. There's no strict odor prohibition. I mentioned this. The operation plan includes an adequate measure to minimize nuisances to the neighborhood and community, including minimizing odor, noise, light, traffic, and loitering. And the operation plan, you have to disclose your odor prevention devices. So we have staff's ability to review and look and comment and condition, but there isn't this guarantee to the public that there will be no odors. So that's something I want to specifically point out to the board in case the board is not okay with that. And then the last one is this is not contingent on the tax passing in November. So there's a couple of things that we can do with that. One is that we can make changes to this ordinance. If you want to make it contingent, if you want to fix that odor, you can. It's going to go back to the planning commission. It's like a 2-month turnaround. We can adopt this ordinance and then start amending it. It's not going to go into effect for 30 days, and the coastal piece isn't going to go into effect a lot longer than that. We can have it changed probably before anybody ever actually applies for a use permit. And then, you know, normally when we set these meetings to introduce, we then have the next meeting to adopt. I think we have some reasonable leeway. If you want to set it to adopt, not on October 9th, but at the first meeting in November, and see if it passes, I don't think that offends anybody's sense of due process. If you set it out a year, probably it does, but, you know, we introduced it. We have to go at least 5 days. If we go 30 days, I don't see it being 35, 40 days. I don't see it being a big problem. So those are all things that the board can do, and that might be the end of this. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Joel. I'm going to go ahead and go, sorry, Supervisor Berkowitz.
No, go ahead.
I was going to go to public comment first.
And then we'll come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Public comment, please.
Yes, the piece of property I have over there in North Morrison, this is, they keep speaking about the odor. One thing I can't process over there is sauerkraut. And, you know, that's amazing, you know, that's how a sawmill or fish products. But sauerkraut is on the list of the 3. So the odor must be really, you know, even though I like sauerkraut. But, you know, that's something to think about with the odor of these plants, because I know it's really a problem.
Thank you, Joe. Public comment.
Hi, Robert again. You know, as far as the higher fees go, you know, I don't know that necessarily anybody's going to object to paying a little higher fees, but you know, as far as in lieu of the taxes, I would hope that the board, when it consider the tax ordinance as the community's will for cannabis, because personally, I support the tax ordinance going to the public as a member of the cannabis working group, but I don't personally support the additional taxes. You know, I believe if we had a zero tax on manufacturing, we'll be more likely to attract businesses from Oakland that do have taxes on manufacturing. You know, so I think that we can compete for jobs there. And so personally, I was going to vote against the tax, you know, when it comes up. You know, there's a 15% excise tax to the state. There are some community benefits too, through grants that they can apply for if they have an ordinance that allows some parts of the industry. But it is 2 separate things. A cannabis user that's educated is not going to vote to tax themselves any further, you know, at a retail establishment, you know. I don't think, you know, I don't see myself as costing the community, you know, anything extra as a cannabis user or as a business person, you know, in a community as poor as we are, you know. The businesses and organizations that have some financial solvency to them, you know, have a positive impact on crime, you know, because I'm sure law enforcement would agree a lot of the time it's, hey, do you have a camera down the street though? I'd like to see the car that pulled up. I didn't see the car. You know, it comes down to a camera trail, and I think the police department of Fortuna actually kind of, they've set up a registration of cameras, kind of big brotherly, but, you know, I'm not going to recommend we do that, but 3 times the local law enforcement has come to my organization to look at our cameras, you know, and so I just don't see the huge extra burden, you know. There's quite a layer of state requirements, you know, that really, I think, protect the community. And again, a $15,000 bond, you know, or triple the bond rate to help protect the community. And, you know, and so Joel did say, you know, I don't think anybody would be offended if we waited till election season, you know, and of course I would, because I'm not going to vote for the tax, you know. I don't see it as, you know, I don't see, you know, whether we're willing to put a burdensome tax on ourselves as being indicative of whether we choose to use cannabis or not. You know, I saw the tax as a piece of community government and, you know, a chance for the community to make choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
Jesse Davis.
Jesse.
Thank you guys for all your work. I just want to talk about the tax. I support the tax. I hope it passes. I don't think I've ever said that about a tax before. I've never voted for a tax before, I don't think. But local taxes really are different than federal taxes. It's a different nature, the way the monetary system works. Local taxes, localities don't have the ability to generate revenue any other way, really, unless it's coming from the Treasury. So local taxes are good in that regard, especially if they're used wisely. But if it doesn't pass, there's also a potential for significant revenue increase through property tax value increases. When somebody builds a building or makes improvement or sets up an expensive facility, that increases the property tax base here, along with unsecured property taxes for business operations. So it's more than just, the tax that comes through with this one that's going to the ballot. Increased in business activity and construction generates significant revenue for the county. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse.
Hello, Aaron Skroback. Glad to see that this is finally here. The many components of this ordinance have been brought before this board through numerous cannabis updates from the working group. There should be no reason for this not to pass. Perhaps it will not receive all 5 votes, but I am hoping for 4. As all the board members have been reminded, Prop 64 won approval in every precinct and district in Del Norte County. Furthermore, on March 13th of this year, when the permanent ban was voted in, the board added the following statement. It is the intention of the Board of Supervisors that this prohibition will be repealed and comprehensive regulations will be enacted by December 12th, 2018. Retail and manufacturing being 2 key pieces of comprehensive regulations. The working group continues its efforts on finalizing cultivation to meet the December 12th date as one of the final segments. Please do as you've promised and end this portion of the ban without further delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Good morning.
Good morning. Patty McCauley, Redwood Coast Collective. I'm coming here to plead that you will stick with the original recommendation from the board and allow medical cannabis to be 500 feet away from any school or church or facility. We are 3,100 feet away from a public school where children come and go across crosswalks. It's open, they walk home. The church that is next to us has no problem with us. We've been there for 10 years, no nuisance, no complaints. It is a closed campus. They average 3 to 22 students per year. They cannot leave the facility unless they are picked up from their parents outside, so there'll be no walking to and from. It is hard to find another location. We were going to find one right there on Washington Avenue. To move locations, this is a backup. Next thing you know, as soon as we're getting ready to sign the lease, another daycare facility went up across the street. So we're limited. We've been there for over a decade. We're going 11 years now. We just hope that you'll reconsider the 500-foot limit. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Okay. Whoops.
Hello again.
Hello.
I'm Kevin Hendrick, and Bob's my supervisor. I want to thank everybody that worked on this, the cannabis group and the county staff. This is, I think this is what you were looking for. This is really a cautious approach to this. It's a very restrictive ordinance, and that seems to be the way that you intended it to go, the expansion of setbacks. And but I do want to agree with Bob. I love to jump on opportunities to agree with Bob that if you were a business, it jumped out at me too. A 1-year permit seems like that if you think about it, if you're a business, I mean, Chris, if you had a year to roll out a product, you wouldn't do it. And maybe it doesn't need to be changed right now, but I'm glad Bob brought it up, so you have at least one person that agrees with you today, Bob. And maybe you just have to keep Well, you said you didn't see any other agreement. Maybe it's okay to study it and see what happens and make a change. And you know, the bigger challenge right now is, do you adopt the ordinance now and see what happens with the tax? Because if you adopt the ordinance, then people will see you're serious, which I love to see. You made a promise, or at least your intentions to move ahead. Do the ordinance, then the people will know that they should vote for the tax, because the tax will provide the money for the regulation and the enforcement of the ordinance. So it's almost a chicken and egg kind of thing. So I'm going to encourage you to move ahead with the ordinance, set the public hearing at your next available meeting. And as you've said before, if you need to change something in the ordinance, you can change it. You said that with the ban. It must be equally true with the adoption of regulations to be able to do this. And I've heard you say that many times in many meetings, that you need to start someplace and you improve it as you go. And I think this is, again, and I think of Liz Freeman and her constant comments about concerns for the community. I think this is really a very cautious approach. It's a good first step. It may not be perfect, but I encourage you to move ahead with this. And to be clear, the Democrats did vote on Measure B, and we see it as a really important step that the cannabis tax get approved so that this all works out, because you have an unregulated market right now. You have a black market. You have numbers of meetings I've watched, and you may not be sorry, but I'm sorry I can't come to all your meetings. I do watch. And the number of people say they drive to Brookings. Well, that's an issue with gas. It's an issue with cannabis. In fact, it's legal to buy gas up there. I don't think it's legal to go up to Brookings and buy cannabis and bring it back. So you have this unregulated, illegal situation, and you're not getting any tax money out of it. I mean, and Bob said it, I think, correctly. Cannabis is here. So what do you intend to do about it? And I think having a well-structured, well-considered set of regulations, and I encourage the voters to vote for the tax, so you have funding to be able to keep this sensible and keep it sane and keep it appropriate for this county. And I'll never hesitate to remind you that a large percentage of the population, both in California and Del Norte County, a majority of voters, 59%, voted to enable you to make these choices. Doesn't mean you have to allow it, but it is I think it is the consensus that I'm hearing from the people, and I hope it is something that you'll see the wisdom to move ahead with.
Thank you. Good morning.
Eric Gilder. I just do kind of want to throw a little bit of support towards Patty. I have kind of been a little bit of an advocate, along with a couple other people, for some less restrictive setbacks for medical-only retail establishments. She has been operating for quite a considerable amount of time in this community. She's done a really good job. I do understand your feelings in regards to a smaller setback. It's much smaller than by 100 feet than the state standard. I just think that, you know, in consideration of specific individual businesses, her business falls within, you know, what I felt as my own personal community opinion was a good spot. But again, I just wanted to give my vocal support for that. It's up to you guys, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no more public comment, we'll bring it back to the board. I believe Supervisor Berkowitz had a question to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring Joel back for a minute. Joel, section 20.67.60, paragraph F. I'm sure you're familiar with it. States that employee handling of edible cannabis products or ingredients shall be trained on proper food safety practices. I think the paragraph needs to spell out who's going to provide that training. Will a certificate be required as proof of compliance? Just who's going to issue that?
Well, we can beef that up. I think that is one of the things that we're parroting from state law. Kind of gives people in the county the notice, and it gives county staff a little easier time imposing it. We don't have to explain it as a kind of a vague condition. You know, think the health department is already kind of the only game in town for issuing food handling cards, but we can, you know, we can always clarify and add things to ordinances, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Gitlin, please.
Well, this shouldn't come as any great shock to anybody, as I do not support the introduction of these ordinances in any way, shape, form. And I'd like to share an anecdotal story. All of our supervisors were just returning from the Rural County Conference, and we had a very excellent presentation from the number 2 man at the Highway Patrol. His name is Rich Desmond, excuse me. He's right below the commissioner, and he started talking about impaired driving. And the number of spike and increases in impaired driving has gone up 25% in the last year since the marijuana product has been mainstreamed. And I asked him afterward, I said, does that include an increase in 1181s, which are minor incidents, 1179s, which are serious accidents, and 1144s, which are fatalities? And he says, absolutely yes. I said, what seems to be the problem? Are you communicating this to the Assembly? And he kind of said, this is the way it is. We're not exactly listened to, in words to that effect, because he has to be respectful to the people he works with. There are just all kinds of red flags flopping around in the introduction of this product. You can't deal with it federally. Yes, it is illegal, Mr. Hendrick, to bring it across state border from Oregon to here. That is an offense. And yes, Mr. Hendrick, you can actually buy gas up in Oregon. That's not an offense. But I think the issue of even the one I have compassion for, which is compassionate, the medicinal marijuana, those who are promoting this, and I believe that anybody who is in pain or is in terminal should have this product available to them, but those who are proffering it have no letters like MD in back of their name or Pharm Ed in back of their name. They're just people who have experience. So that has to be addressed, and I'm open to that. But the other ordinances, I'm sorry to say, and I'm not sorry to say, I'm very proud to say that I cannot support them in any way, shape, form, or manner to introduce them into and eventually mainstream into regular, everyday life in Delaware County.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to move that we, considering we haven't had a chance to look at this other than today, that we move to set this for a public hearing on October 9th.
Okay. I think that's part of this action, correct?
Go ahead.
Normally, we would agendize it as set for hearing on a date, but I left the date out in case you wanted to wait until after the vote, the election.
Sure.
So I guess, you know, just saying the date you want to set it in your motion is the appropriate thing to do.
Okay. Then Supervisor Berkowitz, would you also consider in your motion, besides setting the date, the remainder of the language within the items A, B, and C on our agenda? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Okay, there's a motion on the table. Do we have a second at this time, or do we want to consider further discussion?
Well, I would, you know, just a discussion on Bob's motion. I would rather see us set it for a date after the election, which our next meeting after the election would be November 11th. And while we, I think, have fulfilled our responsibility of putting an ordinance out there, I think there's a responsibility on the people, even though Mr. Dorrego does not feel like he's going to be supportive of the tax. That could impact how I vote on this ordinance if it does not pass. So just to let you know that there are consequences out there for actions, no matter which way they go. So I'm supportive of moving that to October the 11th.
Mr. Chairman, I would have no objection to that, and I'll just rescind the motion.
Very good. So,
Just amend it or rescind?
Resend it.
I'm sorry, Supervisor, did you say October 11th or November?
November 11th.
I'm sorry, I heard October. So this is, okay, so that's the correction. This is after, post-election, we'd have a meeting and to discuss, as we'd have the results of the election in front of us. Okay, I just want to clarify what I heard.
so the motion's been rescinded. Do we have another motion on the table?
Yeah, I would move to introduce the following cannabis ordinances, waive full reading, further reading, and set a hearing for November the 11th of 2018, an ordinance establishing regulations for commercial cannabis retail and manufacturing activity outside the coastal zone, an ordinance establishing regulations for commercial cannabis retail and manufacturing within the coastal zone, and an ordinance amending the prohibition of commercial cannabis, and designate county council to prepare a summary of the ordinances for publications as requested.
I'll second that.
We do have a motion and second on the table. Further discussion?
Joel, what's that going to push this back? I mean, we're talking about retail. This is going to affect the co-ops, and we push it back to November 11th. How is that going to affect them?
There is, at this point, probably an inevitable window where January 1st will hit. They won't be able to operate the way they're doing it, and we won't have them permitted yet. So if this is, at least for the non-coastal side, it'd go into effect 30 days. That's, mid-December. Then you go through the process. The next planning commission meeting is going to be in January, unless, even if we were accepting applications early before the 30 days was up, that December planning commission would be after the 30 days. So I guess maybe the planning commission could consider it, even though it's not legal yet. I haven't thought about that. Planning commission could consider it because they're not really approving, they're just, well, they really are approving it though, unless, yeah. I would say January is the earliest under that circumstance that the planning commission could approve. And
so if we go at October 9th, we keep within that January 1st deadline. If we go into November, as Supervisor Hemmingson has suggested, then we're pushing back into January.
Yeah, and best case scenario, it would be a matter of weeks that they can't operate. If it takes longer to get their permit stuff application together and everything, it could be even longer. Another thing is there's almost an inevitable delay because they can't apply for their state license until they have their local authorization. And we won't let them begin activity until they get their state license. So if they got their local authorization in January, I'm not sure how long it's going to take them to get their state permit. I think some amount of time where they can't operate is probably inevitable.
Yeah, I do want to hear briefly from Ms. Kungstall on this fee piece. I'm still concerned about it. Obviously, I think we could potentially take some corrective action if this were to pass, if your shop or some of the other departments affected by this. I want to hear from you, though. Obviously, you probably considered this at length. You've obviously recommended to county council that you think you could live within the current fee structure, but I haven't heard that from you directly, so I want you to opine on that briefly.
I think for the manufacturing and the retail, it might be close, but I'm not so sure. It also would depend on the number of permits that we see. If, for example, we receive a number of applications, we have one planner, which would mean we would likely, hire a consultant, a planning firm to review our applications, and then there would be an additional cost associated with that. But I like the fact that you mentioned that county that had visited us and their fee schedule, and I think that I need to go back and revisit that paperwork that we had and see whether or not we might need to refine our numbers if in fact we are maybe undershooting it. I know we would definitely be undershooting it for cultivation. There's a lot more that we are going to need to review, but I can definitely get together with Joel and inform him. So if we need to move forward with an ordinance update sooner than later, we can hopefully get that all timed in with what we're
because I'm
now.
kind of envisioning some of these places that I've now personally seen, something like what Supervisor Hemmingson and I visited on the RCRC trip this year in Arcata. Great manufacturing facility, pretty much has all the components of what is currently being addressed within our ordinance, but the amount of time that the county staff put into this, and it's not just your department, that should absolutely be taken a look at.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We will
it is a concern.
Look into that. We could even potentially give them a call and talk to Humboldt County Planning about this.
Sure. No, I'd appreciate some follow-up on that.
Okay.
Just trying to look out for you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
And then on another note, so it's okay. Another note, I just want to reflect briefly back on Mr. Dorigo's comments on this vote that we will take as a community in November on taxation. Whether we like it or not, I know this board discussed it at length, debated it at length. You saw we fell on it on a 4-5, but one of those components that I think needs to continue to be reiterated on that taxation piece is there's some provisions in there specific to the outliers, the folks that aren't coming into the normalcy of operating within the confines of ordinances within our community. This allows a mechanism essentially for our tax collector to assess those properties, and if they continue to not comply, it gives us an enforcement avenue to potentially seize those properties. For anybody who either likes or doesn't like it, like I've heard some names mentioned here today, just that one piece alone within that taxation ordinance, for those that want to be lawful within the spirit of operating here in Del Norte County specific to marijuana cultivation or marijuana retail or marijuana manufacturing, just those pieces alone should give us some prudence and thought that if we could pass this, it'll give us a mechanism to become essentially a legal place to grow and cultivate and manufacture and retail, and give us a mechanism to finally in this community go after those that aren't law-abiding citizens. That's what I like most about this piece of this taxation clause. I hope it does pass. I hope you would reconsider your position, knowing how much time you've dedicated to this particular discussion on the working group, but just where I'm at on it currently. I don't have any more comments at this time. I've kind of taken up too much wind. Let's go ahead.
Chair Howard.
Sorry.
The actual date for the meeting in November is the 13th.
Do we need to amend the motion to reflect that then?
Yes, I would amend to the November the 13th.
Okay.
I probably was looking October. That's why.
Thank you, Jay.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second, and without further discussion, Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, thank you, guys. Thank you for your time, working group. I know it took us a while to get here. I think we're fulfilling, hopefully, what everybody has hoped for. Let's go ahead and move on with item number 13, which is approve and adopt budget transfer item 09-03 in the amount of $892,519 within the public safety realignment budget to increase revenue and expense lines to reflect the actual funds received to date for fiscal year 17-18 as requested by the Director of Health and Human Services. Do we have a motion on the table?
Move for approval.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Public comment. Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right. Under legislative and budget issues, consider miscellaneous legislative and budget matters pertinent to the County of Del Norte. Authorize the chair to sign and send appropriate letters with respect to matters pending before the state and federal governments. Jay, anything on that before we get to item 14?
Nothing miscellaneous today.
Okay, thank you. Let's move ahead with item 14 then, which is conclude the public hearing and adopt the fiscal year 18-19 budget as finally determined and all special district budgets by resolution as presented over the course of the budget hearing. Adopt resolution 18-028, a resolution fixing tax rate for fiscal year as required by government code. Adopt resolution 2018-029, setting the appropriation limits for the fiscal year, approve the annual children's budget as presented, approve the use of the Stimson Fund for the internal leasing of 4 vehicles for the Sheriff's Patrol and 1 for the assessors as recommended by the Proactive Financial Goals Committee, and approve the position changes as outlined in Attachment A as requested by County Administrative Officer. Jay, please.
Well, you just did a considerable amount of the work by reading all of that off. That would be the motion. We have brought before the board a recommended budget in June. That was approved. We've brought back a recommended budget at the beginning of the public hearing. The recommended budget has been available for review, and today we're here to finalize and adopt the budget for 2018-19 with all 6 of those actions.
Very good.
And Mr. Chairman, I would move to conclude the public hearing and adopt the 2018-2019 recommended budget as read earlier by yourself.
Very good. We have a motion, a second on the table. Let's go ahead and open it up for public comment. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is still morning.
Yes, yes it is, for 10 more minutes. I would like to commend the board on having a balanced budget. All general fund, non-general fund, and special district budgets governed by the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors are balanced. Being without debt and enjoying perfect credit is wonderful. So good work to all those involved in making this come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Still good morning. Norma Williams, Chapter President, Del Norte County Employees Association, SEIU 1021. This is a balanced budget, I do agree. It does reflect actually some classification changes and as well as a raise for 1 classification, which is what was noted before. However, which is good. I mean, we're not objecting to that. However, equity for one should be equity for all. Looking through the budget, is there equity for the other classifications within the miscellaneous professional units? I don't see it. Is there anything in the budget that addresses the compaction issue that this county has been kicking down the road for numerous years now? I don't see it. I don't see anything dealing with minimum wage. I looked through that, I don't see it. Back in July of this year, our bargaining team already submitted and put down on the table, we laid our cards out. We put down an economic proposal that would deal with equity, with parity, minimum wage, and compaction. We next meet with your team October 2nd. We have yet to see your cards on the table. So, yes, we recognize that you're going to be adopting this budget. Yes, we approve Attachment A. But we're calling into question and challenging each and every single one of you to finally put some skin in the game and finally put your cards out on the table on October 2nd and have your staff counter our economic proposals. We want to see transparency within this budget. Our union wants it, our workers deserve it. We want to see where this budget is going to reflect what we deserve. Equity, parity, and finally resolving compaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Okay, let's go ahead and bring it back to the board. Discussion from the board. Supervisor Gitlin.
I find myself agreeing somewhat with Ms. Williams on some issues. I'm going to vote for this budget, but there are a lot of things that are very troubling in this budget. And the rhetorical question I ask is, why are we spending $96,000 a year to pay ourselves back on the airport development project in 2018 dollars that will eventually be for 40 years at $2052 or whatever that 40-year period ends up? Why are we doing that? Now, it's on there. It's $96,000 that doesn't go to something that Ms. Williams addressed, or possibly other things. But like it is, you have to look at the whole picture, and there's more good than there isn't. So I'll vote aye on supporting this budget.
Thank you. Other comment or discussion from board members at this time? Seeing none, let's go ahead and poll the vote.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Thank you. Good job.
So I do think there's some clarification that needs to be made. In the last agreement with the employees, we not only addressed the minimum wage, we addressed it through 2020. So I think that needs to be understood. As far as compaction, yes, that's an issue. That's an issue that was thrust upon us by the state of California, and we will be addressing it. But we will not negotiate in open forum, so that won't be discussed. As far as the airport payback, I think that needs to be clarified. That's a fund that is through a loan to the airport, and that's a commitment the board made many years ago to make sure that fund retained itself. So I just wanted to clarify those.
Very good. Thank you, Jay. All right. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move on with item number 15, which is receive brief reports and announcements from County of Del Norte and programs and projects from our 2x2 committees, goals committees, and board and staff. Let's go ahead and kick it off today. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, I participated in the National Association of Counties telephone conference regarding the funding for PILT and SRS. We talked about the Washington, D.C. fly-in held earlier in September. Over 60 productive meetings were held on Capitol Hill with senators and congressmen, and we're looking for a permanent solution for PILT and SRS instead of having to go back to D.C. every year. We also talked about the federal farm bill, which is currently stalled in Congress and will not probably be solved this year, which would necessitate a continuing resolution. The Park Service bill is in the markup phase. We're pushing for an $11 billion package, which would include improvements to trails, roads, and an increase in park maintenance. This is for the next Congress to handle. Supervisor Gitlin and I were invited to be a part of a coalition of the school district, the city, and other interested parties in helping the cable channel to be activated with local programming, promoting Del Norte County and Crescent City utilizing local students in career technical training. Both Supervisor Gitlin and I hold California teaching credentials and have teaching experience. I want to commend Caltrans for finally changing the signs along the Highway 101 bypass at the county line from Congressman Don Clausen Highway to Congressman Don Clausen Memorial Highway. It seems like they agreed that adding the word memorial to the sign cleared up any confusion as to the name of the current person serving as the current congressman. As you know, Congressman Don Clausen represented this area in Congress for 20 years, and before that was a member of our Board of Supervisors. Last week, I had a monthly meeting with Craig McDonald, the CFO of Center Coast Hospital, where we discussed the homeless problem, the new emergency room doctor's contract, and problems surrounding the licensing of the new dialysis unit. As all of the members of the board, with the exception of Supervisor Cowan, and we both all of us attended the annual Rural County Representatives of California Conference held in Napa. I was especially interested in the session on protecting our schools and the emergency disaster response best practices. Yesterday, Supervisor Gitlin and I attended the LAFCO meeting where we approved the budget and approved resolutions supporting the special districts. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Cowan, please.
A couple weeks ago, we had a juvenile justice meeting. I had a presentation from Thomas Rector regarding just general behavior and what he has been doing, and went out to juvenile hall. Had a meeting over the phone with Senator McGuire discussing several items pertinent to Del Norte County, including last chance grade, homelessness, and where we're at in the permit for the dialysis center. He has been a big help, and it is moving forward. So even though it has taken a while, his help in pushing that forward has been great. Met with the constituents regarding Measure B and talking about the importance of it. Very disappointed that the Republican Party feels if it doesn't pass, then that cannabis is going to go away. Hopefully they will realize that that is not the case, that this board is serious about doing the wishes of our community and making sure that we have good policies surrounding cannabis and how important Measure B is. Also had several meetings with people regarding Prop 6 and the realities of that versus what's being said that in the false information that's going out in the county. Then had a meeting with Terry Sapon from Building Healthy Communities regarding safety in the schools. We've been working together since last fall, or excuse me, last spring, along with Lisa Howard over at the school districts and working with the kids of how they feel about safety in the schools and what they want to see. I didn't, as Mr. Berkowitz pointed out, attend RCRC. I did something instead that I have never done, and that was take a girls' trip and spend 10 days completely away from everything and clear my head. It was wonderful. So that's it for me.
Very good. Supervisor Gitlin.
Thank you. I'll try not to be too repetitive. We've got a few things to go over that weren't touched by Supervisor Berkowitz about our meeting 2 Wednesdays back with the Superintendent Jeff Harris to discuss programming on Channel 4. Which I might add is mostly dark, and occasionally you see some government programming. But we'll be having ongoing discussions, and the wheels are in motion to improve the quality of this government channel. That there'll be information, there'll be community calendar, there'll be things that are relevant to the community on that Channel 4 in a very short time. Also had a meeting with Sutter CEO Mitch Hanna and a constituent who asked me to please accompany her regarding her recent emergency room visit. The patient, she wrote a letter to the editor, so she is public, but I won't say her name now, used the Sutter emergency room many months back. Apparently, and I didn't know this, there were 5 different scaffolds of emergency room charges that the patient can be assessed with, and she was at a 4 rating, and she seemed to think her emergency was very minor. So she asked about why this was such a high rating, which translated into a higher cost during what was a very short visit. It's a $2,800 visit for what she said was about a 15-minute visit to the emergency room. Mr. Hanna promised an investigation into this complaint. The patient is awaiting the review of that billing, and I'll report back to you when we have that information. We don't at this time. I'm looking at the issue on a macro level rather than a micro level for this one particular constituent, and I questioned just how many other patients are there who go into the emergency room and are assessed a certain level, and then they don't report it out. It just goes away. It's just whatever it is, they pay it or it's charged. And I asked Mr. Hanna for policy regarding this and how it is that when someone uses the service, and he said he would look into this and get back to me, and I expect that he would. But he also recommended that there people who need services use the walk-in facility across the street with a much lower cost and much lower rates than the emergency room, and apparently there's some issue with putting some kind of signage out there in the county, and I'll be following up with our CDD department to see if we can feature this walk-in service in a more prominent level. Sunday, September 15th, I, myself, and other Take a Blight Out of Blight volunteers participated in the Smith River Alliance beach cleanup. Our volunteers removed 3/4 of a ton of trash in the brush on the ocean side of 101, which is about a 600-mile swath of trash south of Anchor Way. An incident took place while we were doing this successful cleanup with some trespassers who we were currently occupying on the east side of the highway, an area that we just a few weeks ago cleaned up. They were going in and out of the dumpsters to pull things out, and we went over to them and I said, "What are you doing?" And Says, we want to see what's in there. And then I said, the owner of the property, which is private property, Ambrose, said, you're trespassing, and pointed to the signs, which turned out to be a little bit of an ugly incident. They got some threats, and there were 3 people back there illegally using the property, squatting on the property, trespassing on the property. So we were forced to call the sheriff, and he responded immediately and then escorted them off the property. But what took place afterward was they had to remove all of their personal effects. And that was a holy mess. I can't even begin to explain it, including 9 shopping carts and other items of personal use, which unfortunately they just left there. They said they're going to be moving it, they never did. So this created another burden for the property owner, Ambrose, to remove that. And it's got to be a situation where we have to take a different position on this. There are laws, there are rules we have. You can't trespass, you can't do these kinds of things. However, this community needs to develop some kind of it just can't be 1 or 2 people. It has to develop a resolve to say we need to take care of this, and people cannot live in this antisocial way. I attended the city council meeting again last week, asking the council if it would place an item to match the county funding of abating trash on the highway median, which is the green belt just north of town. This item has yet to be placed on the city agenda, so I brought with me at this past visit Warden Jim Robertson's Pelican Bay State Prison Representative Robert Losaco and fellow Lions Club members Jim and Sheila Coop, who help and we participate in the perimeter cleanups on the freeway, to ask the city to please place this on the agenda to match the county monies, which we just passed in this budget. So we will have monies to move forward on this freeway litter abatement issue. And in connection to that, this past Friday, after our rural counties meeting in Napa, I drove to Sacramento. I had a prearranged appointment with the Secretary of CDCR, Ralph Diaz, and we discussed the importance of Pelican Bay State Prison to our Del Norte County economy, and being the #1 employer. And then we also discussed the issue having to do with this starting up of this long dormant program 21 years ago when it was discontinued, about level 1 inmates coming out to the community and performing community service. And he absolutely was 100% in support of this. As a matter of fact, he says that's what I used to do when I was at Corcoran and I was a line officer. This is Secretary Diaz. He says, we ran those community cleanups and it was a great thing and I'd like to see it back. So I'm hopeful in the coming weeks and months as we go and surpass these hurdles, which we're doing as we speak, that we will see a level 1 inmate program working closely with Caltrans in abating trash on the freeway median on a periodic basis, once a month basis, starting in fiscal year 2018-2019. I mentioned before about the CHP presentation on the official protocol for measuring drug-impaired driving. The impaired drivers' roadside stops, as I mentioned before, have increased 24% since the cannabis product has been mainstreamed and legalized. It's associated spike in the 1181s I mentioned, the 1179s, and the 1144 traffic fatalities. Commissioner Stanley also reiterated that there is no official protocol right now in pulling someone who is impaired driving under drug influence. There is for alcohol, but they haven't developed one, and this is a very dangerous thing that we're going into, especially those who traverse up and down 199, which is a dangerous enough road as it is. Now we have this combination of people driving impaired, a spike in increase, and again, it's very problematic. And I think Supervisor Berkowitz mentioned our meeting with the local area formation committee. We did review some areas of influence and also reviewed our final budget. There's no exigent information report at that time. That's my report.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yes, thank you. I had a conference call on our whale entanglement working group. We had a proactive financial management meeting. Met with Senator McGuire's new field rep from Eureka, Thomas Witzel. He took Rob Christensen's place, had a nice meeting with him. Also attended the RCRC conference, and while we had a lot of great panel discussions on global trade war and impacts to rural counties, the 2020 census, which is coming up, going to be very important, changing face of media, current political landscapes, educational and entrepreneurial support, services for military families, and the truth about cybersecurity. I think the most moving and telling presentation was given by Alyssa Parker, who was the mother of Emily Parker, who was killed in the Sandy Hook incident. Of course, had the unfortunate circumstances of being involved there, but really gave a perspective of about things about school safety, and had a great story to tell, although very sad. Well worth going. On Friday at the RCRC Board of Directors meeting, we discussed several propositions and took positions on those, and that's about it for me.
Thank you, Supervisor. As I kind of briefly glanced over earlier, I was invited to a tour of a local tribe's cannabis operations, in which they actually lease out land to a cultivator. Assemblyman Adam Gray from Merced County was present during and at the discussion that we had. It definitely opened my eyes to what a larger scale commercial operation might look like in this county. It was in the coastal zone, and more specifically, it was enclosed within large greenhouses with every kind of gadget you could think of to ensure that there's no noxious odor, and it was off the grid. So I was actually fairly impressed with it, but the operation was being conducted by a business that was outside our community, funded it, and as I mentioned before, employed 8 people full-time all year round, with the goal of producing about 2,000 pounds a year under 4 crop rotations. So pretty interesting. We'll see if they're able to achieve their goals. Also had a discussion with Tracy Van from the Community Health Needs Assessment that is conducted every 3 years by law for nonprofit entities like Sutter Coast. This one was specific for Sutter Coast. It's the second time I've participated in a community needs assessment on health-related issues within our community, and did communicate with Ms. Van hopefully some items on community health needs. And one of my specifics I did focus in on was obesity issues here in our community, and really helping to look at those issues and what other health effects those issues lead to here. Participated in the Financial Review Committee meeting, agenda review, and as mentioned, RCRC. As Supervisor Hemmingson and Supervisor Berkowitz reflected upon, the presentation of Alicia Parker was clearly the most moving from an individual like myself who still has children within our school and a wife that teaches at the high school. It was it hit home. I had a great deal of discussion with Ms. Parker after the meeting, and because it gave me a pause to an incident that occurred at the school district at the high school last school year, where a child, kiddingly or not, caused an incident that my son was actually in the hallway when it occurred, and if it was any different, it could have been a different situation today. But the bottom line, I think, after listening to this presentation, what I want to ensure, at least for my next step and maybe the board's next step, is to have some communication with the school district, because as my wife continues to come home, I do believe the district right now is not prepared for an incident, and I am prepared to go to the next school district board meeting and make this case. But in addition, ensure that they're offered services like what Ms. Parker is offering through her nonprofit foundation. I think with the proactive approach that she is using in order to be prepared, it's something that our district could gain some knowledge from and better prepare in case something like this were to happen. Because we don't want to see an incident like Sandy Hook happen here in our community. And then also had a great discussion. I actually went to Sacramento before the RCRC meeting, met with Assemblyman Wood and Mayor Enscore and Chairman of the Health District Board on an issues concerning the cost of health care in our community, which essentially revolved around Sutter. This is a meeting that we've been trying to establish with the Assemblyman, originally requested by Supervisor Cowan last December. We were finally able to get together with the Assemblyman, and Dr. Duncan held captive essentially with great conversation and fact what is happening here in our community with the cost of health care. I know the City Council and the Board of Supervisors have addressed this through many resolutions to try to address our health care not only needs but also costs within our community and what is driving people out of the area. But what was communicated to the Assemblyman was very matter of fact by Dr. Duncan, and the response that we received from Assemblyman Wood, Dr. Wood in this case, was great. I thought his essential agreement that he's not only concerned about the cost of health care in this community, but his continued vigilance on this, thanking not only the City Council but the Board of Supervisors for their continued vigilance in agreeing not to just have this conversation stop there, but to continue to have it with our community going forward to try to address these ever-increasing issues that are not just in our emergency room, but they are also outside our emergency room within the current Sutter Health structure, Sutter Coast Health structure for payment here. So hopefully, as conversations move forward, we could begin to have those conversations again with Sutter to address some of those needs. Also met with Senator McGuire while we were there. We talked at great length about decision by the board around Proposition 6. And then after that discussion, had a great discussion with Michael Johnson, employee, deputy chief of the SHOP program, which is the State Highway Operations and Prevention Plan finance director for the entire state of California. So everything that happens on a state highway that is financed or being spent money on goes through his operation. And what I wanted to get at from him is that this board has debated over the last couple months either support for Proposition 6 or opposition of Proposition 6 through resolution. We chose to oppose Proposition 6 at our last meeting. But what I wanted to do is have this clarity, because there seems to be a lot of numbers floating around out there in the state. And this is of great concern to me because I've never actually physically looked at what those numbers might look like. And how it would impact if Proposition 6 were to pass, how would it impact last chance grade. I think you've heard the supervisors debate that there's potential and very strong potential for the work we've done to date in advancing funds for the geotech and the biological assessment on last chance grade to go away. Our senators made it very clear that that would occur. Also, representatives from Caltrans, Jamie Mattioli and Sebastian Cohen at the last meeting with Congressman Huffman have made it clear that's what would occur. So I wanted to get the facts from the guy who deals with that piece of the budget annually with Caltrans, Michael Johnson in Sacramento, and he did just that. He explained to me very clearly that there's only so much money that comes into the state annually. What we were operating on structure-wise before Senate Bill 1 passed was just addressing road issues that were essentially dealing with safety or emergencies. That was it. Plans like last chance grade, which essentially allows us to take the current alignment and move it outside into a new route, would have never been addressed without SB 1 because there's no money within the state budget to do it. As described by Mr. Johnson, last chance grade in their terms is described as a whale, almost impossible to swallow. It costs too much to do a project of that size. Even with the amount of federal dollars that come in and state dollars that come in from gas tax, being able to swallow just one project that encompasses well over a third of their annual budget for SHOP is nearly impossible, especially when they're wrestling with a project to replace 2 bridges on the I-5 corridor in Stockton, which just a little smaller budget figure on that, just shy of $1 billion. Just the last chance grade project, just this project on the I-5 corridor would eat up almost the entire SHOP programming budget for an entire fiscal year. And so what SB1 allowed them to do was finally start addressing community needs, not only within counties, but also within the state highway system that actively went beyond just emergencies and safety issues. It allowed them to be a little bit more proactive, get to about a 50% funding level, even though they have this 10-year plan that is essentially a wish list, but it's a wish list of every county in the state of California on the essential, what they believe in those counties are the essential highway needs to address, like what we did with Highway 199, 197. And if you'll recall, Highway 199, 197, we had to, because we were operating in this time before SB1, we had to actually advance our STIP dollars, our State Transportation Improvement Project dollars. Our local transportation commission actually advanced those dollars to ourselves just to get the operating funds to go to construction on that. It was an amount of $23 million, and as Supervisor Hemmingson recalls in the final meeting that we had in San Diego and got approval for those funds, our community had to pay for that. Not the SHOP program under Caltrans, but the community had to pay that for that project just to do it because it was outside a safety element and outside an emergency element. So when we're talking about last chance grade and we're talking about our ability to address a route that will absolutely have to be in a new alignment outside of last chance grade, and the state is telling us that they cannot do it under their current fiscal situation without the resources under SB1, I've got to take that to heart. So I wanted to reflect on that today. Michael Johnson wasn't either saying pro or con. He can't as a state official, but what he was saying through their budgetary process is that, hey, if this goes away, we're back to the way it was before SB1, and dollars are not only going to be tight, those dollars are only going to be going to emergency and safety issues, period. And last chance grade, unfortunately, does not fall into that category, even though this board has done whatever it can to help push it in that direction. It still has not been declared an emergency or a safety issue. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you for your patience and listening. We'll reconvene in October. Look forward to seeing everybody then. Take care.